The Arizona Territory in 1887 was a land where fortunes were made and lost with the turn of a card, where desperate men made desperate choices, and where the desert sun could bleach the conscience as white as bone. It was here, in the dusty gambling halls of Tombstone, that Marcus Whitmore made the decision that would damn his soul and nearly destroy his daughters. The Whitmore sisters had known hardship before, but never betrayal of this magnitude. Sarah, the eldest at 24, possessed a fierce intelligence that burned behind green eyes like prairie fire. Emma, 21, had inherited their mother's gentle spirit and healing touch, her hands capable of coaxing life from the most barren soil. And Rose, barely 18, carried within her the wild heart of the frontier itself, untamed, unbroken, and beautiful as a desert sunrise. Their mother, Elizabeth, had died giving birth to Rose, leaving Marcus to raise 3 daughters alone on their struggling ranch outside Tucson. For years, he had been a devoted father, teaching them to ride, to shoot, to survive in a land that showed no mercy to the weak. But grief and guilt had slowly poisoned his heart, and when the drought of 1886 killed their cattle and the bank threatened foreclosure, Marcus turned to the bottle and the poker table for solace. "The girls are getting too old to be unmarried," he muttered to himself one night, staring at his empty whiskey glass. "They need guidance, structure." What Marcus called guidance, others would call slavery. In the shadowy corners of frontier towns there existed a trade as old as civilization itself, the buying and selling of human lives. Desperate men sold their daughters to brothel owners, to wealthy ranchers seeking wives, to anyone willing to pay enough to solve their immediate problems. The man who approached Marcus in the Silver Dollar Saloon was smooth-talking and well-dressed, with cold eyes and soft hands that had never known honest work. His name was Cornelius Blackwood, and he ran what he euphemistically called a finishing school for young ladies in El Paso. "Your daughters are quite beautiful," Blackwood said, sliding a leather pouch across the table. "I could provide them with opportunities, education, refinement, and you, my friend, could solve your financial difficulties." The pouch contained more money than Marcus had seen in years, enough to save the ranch, to start over, to drown his sorrows in the finest whiskey. All he had to do was sign a piece of paper, a guardianship transfer, Blackwood called it. Marcus's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. In his whiskey-soaked mind, he convinced himself he was saving his daughters, giving them a chance at a better life. The truth was far darker, and somewhere in his heart, he knew it. The next morning, Marcus woke his daughters before dawn. "Pack your things," he said, avoiding their eyes. "You're going to El Paso, to school." "School?" Sarah's voice was sharp with suspicion. "Pa, we can't afford." "It's all arranged," Marcus interrupted. "A benefactor. You'll have opportunities there, real opportunities." The sisters exchanged glances. Something was wrong. They could feel it in the air like the electricity before a thunderstorm. But they trusted their father, despite his recent troubles. They had no choice. The journey to El Paso took 3 days by wagon. Blackwood rode alongside them, his smile never reaching his eyes, speaking of the wonderful life that awaited them. The sisters grew more uneasy with each mile, but it wasn't until they reached the outskirts of El Paso that the truth became clear. The school was a fortress-like compound surrounded by high walls and armed guards. The students were hollow-eyed young women who moved like ghosts, their spirits broken by months or years of captivity. And Blackwood's true nature revealed itself the moment the wagon passed through the gates. "Welcome to your new home, ladies," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "You'll find the accommodations quite educational." Sarah lunged for the wagon's side, but rough hands seized her arms. Emma screamed and Rose fought like a wildcat, but they were outnumbered and overpowered. As the gates clanged shut behind them, the sisters realized the horrible truth. Their father had sold them. The compound was a nightmare of exploitation and cruelty. The women were forced to work in the kitchens and laundries during the day and at night. Sarah refused to let her mind dwell on what Blackwood had planned for them. She focused instead on escape, studying the guards' routines, mapping the compound's weaknesses, and keeping her sister's spirits alive. "We're getting out of here," she whispered to Emma and Rose during their brief moments alone. "I don't care what it takes." Their chance came 3 weeks later, during a violent thunderstorm that sent the guards scurrying for cover. Sarah had noticed that the eastern wall, where it met the old stables, had loose stones near the base, stones weakened by years of desert wind and rain. While lightning split the sky and thunder masked their movements, the sisters worked frantically to widen the gap. "Hurry," Sarah hissed, her fingers bleeding from the rough stone. "The storm won't last forever." They squeezed through the opening one by one, emerging into the desert night like spirits fleeing hell itself. Behind them, the compound slept, unaware that 3 of its prisoners had vanished into the storm. But freedom in the desert was its own kind of prison. The sisters had no food, no water, no shelter from the elements. They walked through the night, guided only by the stars and their desperate need to put distance between themselves and their captors. By dawn, they were exhausted, dehydrated, and lost in a landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. "We're going to die out here," Emma whispered, her lips cracked and bleeding. "No," Sarah said fiercely. "We survived that place. We'll survive this too." But as the sun climbed higher and the desert heat became unbearable, even Sarah's determination began to waver. They found shelter beneath a rocky overhang, but it was only a temporary reprieve. Without water, they had perhaps a day before the desert claimed them. It was Rose who saw them first, 4 figures moving across the desert like mirages, silent and purposeful. Apache warriors, their faces painted for war, their eyes missing nothing as they approached the sisters' hiding place. The Apache had been tracking Blackwood's operation for months. Their leader, a man called Stone Eagle, had lost his own sister to slavers years before, and he had sworn an oath to the spirits that no other family would suffer as his had. With him rode Windwalker, whose speed and stealth were legendary. Broken Arrow, a warrior poet whose scars told stories of 100 battles, and young Firehorse, barely 20 but already proven in combat. The sisters cowered as the warriors approached, expecting death or worse. Stories of Apache raids filled the newspapers, tales of violence and vengeance that had terrified frontier families for generations. But Stone Eagle's first words shattered their expectations. "You run from the slave house," he said in careful English. "We know this place. We know this evil." The Apache had been watching Blackwood's compound, planning their own assault, when they saw the sisters escape. They had followed, curious about these 3 women who had accomplished what many thought impossible. "Please," Sarah said, stepping protectively in front of her sisters. "We just want to go home." Stone Eagle studied her for a long moment, seeing not an enemy but a fellow warrior, someone who had fought against impossible odds and refused to surrender. "Home is gone," he said simply. "Father sold you, cannot return." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, but she didn't flinch. "Then we'll make a new home." "Yes," Stone Eagle nodded approvingly. "New home, new family, if you have courage." The Apache offered the sisters a choice. They could try to survive alone in the desert, almost certainly dying within days, or they could come with the warriors to their hidden stronghold in the mountains. It was not a decision made lightly. The Apache were at war with the U.S. Army, and harboring white women would bring additional danger. But Stone Eagle saw something in the sisters that reminded him of his own people's struggle for freedom. The journey to the Apache stronghold took 5 days, winding through secret canyons and hidden trails known only to the warriors. The sisters learned to move silently, to read the signs of the desert, to find water where none seemed to exist. They also learned that their rescuers were not the savage killers of newspaper stories, but men of honor, wisdom, and surprising gentleness. Windwalker taught Rose to track animals by their footprints, his patience endless as she stumbled through her first lessons. Broken Arrow shared stories with Emma, his deep voice weaving tales of creation and courage that helped heal her wounded spirit. And Stone Eagle walked beside Sarah, their conversations growing deeper with each mile. "Why did you help us?" Sarah asked one evening as they sat beside a hidden spring. "My sister was taken by men like Blackwood," Stone Eagle replied. "I was too young, too weak to save her, but I am not weak now." "What happened to her?" Stone Eagle's jaw tightened. "She died in their cage, but her spirit lives in every woman I helped to freedom." The Apache stronghold was a marvel of engineering and strategy, built into the living rock of a mountain canyon. Here, the last free Apache lived as their ancestors had, following the old ways while adapting to the new realities of a changing world. The sisters were welcomed not as prisoners or curiosities, but as family members who had proven their worth through suffering and courage. Life in the stronghold was hard but honest. The sisters learned to weave baskets, to prepare traditional foods, to move through the desert like shadows. They also learned to fight, not just with weapons, but with the fierce spirit that had carried the Apache through centuries of struggle. Sarah found herself drawn to Stone Eagle's quiet strength and unwavering principles. He was nothing like the men she had known, not her weak, selfish father, nor the smooth-talking predators like Blackwood. Stone Eagle was a man who kept his word, who protected those under his care, who faced each day with courage and honor. Emma discovered a gift for healing, working alongside the tribe's medicine woman to tend the sick and wounded. Her gentle nature, once seen as weakness, became a source of strength as she learned to channel her compassion into action. Rose, the youngest and wildest, found her calling as a scout and warrior. Her fearless spirit and quick reflexes made her a natural fighter, and she took to Apache warfare like a hawk to the sky. As months passed, the bonds between the sisters and their Apache family deepened. What had begun as rescue became partnership, and partnership became love. The warriors saw in the sisters not just women to be protected, but equals who had earned their place through trial and sacrifice. The ceremony took place on a night when the desert stars seemed close enough to touch. In the traditions of the Apache, the warriors and sisters pledged themselves to each other, not as master and servant, but as partners in the great dance of life and death that played out across the frontier. Stone Eagle placed a necklace of turquoise and silver around Sarah's neck, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "My heart chose you before my mind understood why," he said. "In you, I see the strength of the mountain, the persistence of the river, the courage of the eagle." Windwalker and Rose exchanged vows beneath the same stars, their love born of shared adventure and mutual respect. Broken Arrow and Emma spoke their promises in whispers, their union blessed by the spirits of healing and peace. But their happiness was not destined to remain hidden. Word of the escaped women had reached the territorial authorities, and a massive manhunt was underway. Blackwood, furious at the loss of his property, had offered a substantial reward for their return, and Marcus Whitmore, sobered by guilt and the realization of what he had done, was desperately searching for his daughters to make amends. The confrontation came at dawn, when a combined force of cavalry and bounty hunters surrounded the canyon. The Apache had known this day would come, it always did, but they were prepared to fight for their family, their freedom, and their way of life. "Surrender the women," called the cavalry captain through a speaking trumpet. "No one else needs to die today." Stone Eagle stepped forward, Sarah at his side. "These women are free," he called back. "They choose their own path." "They're white women living with savages," the captain replied. "That's not a choice, that's captivity." Sarah's voice rang clear across the canyon. "I am Sarah Whitmore, and I speak for myself and my sisters. We were sold into slavery by our own father and rescued by these honorable men. We stay by choice, not by force." The standoff lasted 3 days. The Apache were outnumbered, but held the high ground, and their knowledge of the terrain made them nearly impossible to dislodge. Meanwhile, word of the siege spread across the territory, drawing newspaper reporters and curious onlookers. The story that emerged was not the simple tale of savage kidnapping that the authorities had expected. Instead, the public learned of Marcus Whitmore's betrayal, of Blackwood's slave operation, and of the Apache warriors who had risked everything to save 3 innocent women. Public opinion began to shift, and pressure mounted on the territorial governor to find a peaceful solution. The breakthrough came when Marcus Whitmore himself arrived at the canyon, his face haggard with guilt and sleepless nights. He had spent months tracking his daughters, following a trail of rumors and regrets that led him finally to this moment of reckoning. "Sarah," he called out, his voice breaking. "Sarah, I'm sorry, I was wrong. God help me, I was so wrong." Sarah appeared on the canyon rim, her Apache family beside her. She looked down at the man who had given her life and then tried to destroy it, feeling a mixture of anger, pity, and something that might have been forgiveness. "You sold us, Pa," she said simply. "You sold your own daughters to save your ranch." "I know," Marcus sobbed. "I know, and I'll regret it until the day I die. But please, come home. Let me try to make it right." "This is my home now," Sarah replied. "These are my people. You made your choice, and I've made mine." The siege might have continued indefinitely, but fate intervened in the form of a Apache war party returning from a raid on Blackwood's compound. They brought with them evidence of the slave operation, documents, testimonies from rescued women, and Blackwood himself, bound and ready to face justice. Faced with proof of the corruption they had been unknowingly protecting, the cavalry withdrew. Blackwood was arrested and eventually hanged for his crimes. Marcus Whitmore returned to his ranch, a broken man, living out his days in solitude and regret. But for the sisters and their Apache family, a new chapter was beginning. They established a settlement in a hidden valley, a place where Apache traditions and frontier pragmatism could coexist. Other refugees found their way there, escaped slaves, abandoned women, men fleeing unjust laws, all welcomed into a community built on the radical idea that family was defined by choice, not blood. Years later, when travelers spoke of the legendary settlement in the Hidden Valley, they told of 3 sisters who had turned betrayal into triumph, of Apache warriors who had chosen love over vengeance, and of a place where the old ways and the new had found harmony. Sarah became a leader among her people, her intelligence and courage guiding the settlement through good times and bad. Emma's healing skills saved countless lives, her gentle strength a beacon of hope in the harsh desert. Rose grew into a legendary scout and warrior, her name whispered with respect and fear across the territory. And in the quiet moments, when the desert wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of rain, the sisters would remember the night they escaped from hell and found heaven in the most unlikely place, in the arms of warriors who saw them not as property to be owned, but as souls to be cherished. Their father had tried to sell them into slavery, but the Apache had given them something far more valuable: the freedom to choose their own destiny and the courage to fight for it. In the end, that was the greatest treasure of all.